The stars over Holy Terror shuddered long before any mortal eye perceived the wound taking shape beyond them. Deep in the blackness, where the void thickened into the roiling madness of the Imperium, a pressure gathered, first a whisper, then a roar, then the soundless scream of reality being forced to bear a weight it had not known for millennia. The Astronomicon flickered, its magnificent psychic beacon fluttering as if a vast, unseen hand pressed against it from the opposite side of eternity. Custodian wardens raised their halberds, sensing a tremor far beyond any physical enemy, though even they could not decipher its nature. Something ancient and luminous was approaching, drawn into this universe with neither malice nor intention, as helpless before the warp tides as a lone ember carried into a storm. The rift burst open with the radiance of a dying sun. Light poured from it, not the acidic glow of chaos or the spectral fire of demons, but a gentler brilliance, warm and disciplined, shaped by harmony rather than hunger. Within its core drifted a lone figure, unconscious, his robes torn by dimensional violence, the hilt of a strange weapon clutched at his side. His name, known to countless worlds in a distant galaxy, had never once been spoken in this one. Obi-Wan Kenobi, Jedi Master, survivor of the Old Republic, keeper of disciplines long extinguished in this realm. He fell through the void like a meteor of quiet light, striking the upper atmosphere of terror with a trail of pale blue energy that astonished the watch stations. Vox channels erupted with confusion, warnings, demands for identification. Defense lasers primed, yet no order to fire came. There was something uncanny in the descent, something that did not fit the profile of any known threat. The figure landed not in destructive fury but in solemn weight, crashing against the adamantine plating of a forgotten courtyard within the imperial palace itself. Custodian guard were upon him within seconds, their golden armor blazing under the light of the palace spires, halberds pointed with perfect discipline. Obi-Wan stirred, his breath shallow, his mind disoriented from the violent crossing. The Force, normally a serene river flowing around him, now felt strained and discordant, its presence warped as though being pulled in every direction by unseen tides. He attempted to rise, but found his limbs weak, his senses clouded by echoes of the passage that had torn him from his galaxy. When he opened his eyes, he saw towering giants in gold, their faces inscrutable behind sculpted helms, their presence radiating a disciplined, ancient vigilance. He had felt soldiers before, clones, rebels, warriors of countless systems, but these beings carried an aura unlike anything he had ever known, unyielding, absolute, forged by devotion to a purpose so immense it seemed to crush the air around them. The custodians encircled him with measured caution. Their leader stepped forward, his voice resonant through Vox-amplified filters as he commanded the stranger to identify himself. Obi-Wan attempted to speak, but the turbulence of the warp still clung to him, and only fragments emerged. His name, a faint explanation, none of it substantial enough to ease their suspicion. His lightsaber was taken from him with precise, reverent motions, the custodians examining the weapon with a mixture of curiosity and threat awareness. They had seen relics of alien origin, heretical artifacts, and Xenos constructs beyond imagining, but nothing with the elegant, restrained design of the Jedi's blade. Before he could gather enough strength to resist or negotiate, the custodians bound him with psychic nullifying restraints, ones crafted for beings far more dangerous than he appeared. He did not struggle. There was, in their controlled movements and unwavering composure, no malice, only duty. And he sensed, faintly, that escalating the situation would lead only to tragedy in a world already drowning in it. They carried him through the labyrinthine interior of the imperial palace, where the air tasted of incense, sanctified oils, and the lingering metallic tang of sacred machinery. Obi-Wan, drifting in and out of consciousness, glimpsed fragments of the monstrous architecture around him. Vaults large enough to house starships, corridors carved with the deeds of gods and tyrants, choirs of psychers chanting in rhythmic agony to sustain the Emperor's lighthouse across the warp. The sheer density of psychic strain pressed against his mind, making each breath feel heavier than the last. The force did not flow cleanly here. It writhed, entrapped, distorted by the perpetual psychic furnace that powered this civilization's survival. As they descended deeper, the sense of oppression grew. Obi-Wan felt an ancient sorrow permeating the halls, a grief so vast it had become part of the stone itself. This was no empire of hope or balance. This was a realm clinging to life with bloodied fingers, ruled by necessity rather than compassion. The Clone Wars had been horrific, yes, but they had not prepared him for this. A civilization built entirely on the edge of annihilation, sustained only by faith, fear, and the ever-present shadow of chaos. Yet amid the suffocating despair, he sensed something else. A pull, faint but unmistakable, tugging at him like a distant voice calling through an ocean of storms. It was not the Force as he knew it, nor was it the whispered seduction of darkness he had resisted all his life. It was something vast, wounded, and ancient, reaching toward him with the last trembling strands of a mind stretched across millennia. The custodians halted, as if receiving silent instruction. Their formation shifted. The air thrummed. Obi-Wan lifted his head despite the pain lancing through his skull, and he felt it again. A presence, immeasurable in its magnitude, staring through him with a gaze that transcended flesh. The God Emperor of mankind had noticed his arrival. And though Obi-Wan's vision dimmed as exhaustion overtook him, one final chilling thought echoed through his mind before darkness claimed him. This universe, bound by suffering and shaped by endless war, had summoned him for a reason he could not yet comprehend. The ground trembled as though answering the unspoken question, leaving only a silent, foreboding promise lingering in the air. The darkness that claimed Obi-Wan did not feel like the simple stillness of unconsciousness. It was heavy, resonant, filled with distant machinery and muffled chants that pulsed like a heartbeat through the stone. When he stirred again, the world returned in fragments, the scrape of metal on marble, the echo of armored footsteps, the faint vibration of colossal engines humming somewhere far beneath. His senses sharpened slowly, returning one by one as though reluctant to face the weight of this new universe. He found himself standing, though he did not recall rising. Restraints held him upright within a gravitic harness, its pressure firm but not cruel. Around him stretched a vast chamber of obsidian pillars and shifting shadows, lit only by slivers of amber that glowed from high cathedral-like arches. The custodians marched with him in perfect unison, their formation seamless, their golden armor catching the pale light like moving statues carved from suns. They spoke no words, not to him, not to one another, yet each motion was as coordinated as though guided by a single mind. Obi-Wan sensed discipline honed for thousands of years, absolute, unwavering. He attempted to reach for the Force again, to draw even a single breath of its calm presence, but the disturbance he had felt earlier still gnawed at him. What once flowed with natural grace now seemed twisted into turbulent currents, as if every space between atoms trembled under unseen pressure. Here, the Force was not a river. It was a battlefield scarred by eternal conflict. Every attempt to touch it came with a faint whisper of warning, as though the very fabric of reality strained against itself. The custodians guided him down a corridor so immense that even starship docks seemed humble by comparison. The walls were carved with the histories of mankind. Legions marching under burning skies, demon forms bursting from the warp, the Emperor striding in luminous armor across battlefields drowned in blood. Each fresco radiated a sense of grim remembrance, a legacy earned through suffering on a scale Obi-Wan could scarcely comprehend. In the Clone Wars, worlds had burned, but not like this. Never with such finality, such resignation. He observed his captors quietly. Their presence was unlike Jedi clone troopers or any soldiers he had known. They did not merely guard. They watched, studied, judged. And though their faces were hidden, he felt their scrutiny like a physical weight. They were assessing him not as a prisoner, but as an anomaly, one that demanded understanding before it, demanded destruction. The corridor ended in a colossal gate of black steel, layered with golden sigils. With a gesture from the lead custodian, the doors parted soundlessly, revealing a chamber bathed in a dim reddish glow. Its air was warmer, heavy with incense and the faint tang of sacred oils. Strange machinery lined the walls, each device pulsing with the internal light, their purposes indecipherable. As they entered, Obi-Wan sensed a shift, not in the air, but in the minds of the custodians. Their posture tightened, their steps grew even more deliberate. They were approaching something sacred. In the center of the chamber stood a dais of polished obsidian. The custodians guided him onto it, securing him with a series of stabilizing locks. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of machinery. Then the chamber brightened, and from above descended a lattice of golden light that scanned his body with methodical precision. He felt it probing not only his physical form but something deeper, brushing against the frayed edges of his connection to the Force. The sensation was cold, clinical, and yet eerily reverent. A custodian finally spoke, his voice low, shaped by a solemn ritual tone rather than conversation. He identified this place as an antechamber of initiation, a threshold few outsiders had ever seen. Here, anomalies were examined before being judged worthy to proceed deeper into the palace, or to be destroyed for posing an unseen threat. The words were not a threat, merely a statement of immutable duty, but they carried the same weight as a sentence. Obi-Wan listened with stillness, attempting to piece together the fragmented impressions he had gathered. The presence he had felt before, vast, ancient, wounded, lingered still, like a beacon in the distance. It pulsed faintly through the stone floor, echoing with the steady rhythm of the palace itself. It was not calling him, yet it was aware of him, acknowledging him as something more than intruder or prisoner. A shift in the air drew his attention. Another figure approached, armored in gold, but bearing a mantle of crimson over his shoulders. His helm was wrought in more intricate design than the others, marking him as a leader. The custodians bowed subtly, not in servitude, but in recognition of rank born from lifetimes of service. The newcomer studied Obi-Wan with an intensity that bordered on spiritual scrutiny. He spoke of the disturbance that heralded Obi-Wan's arrival, the warp burst that rippled through terror like a warning from the void. He described the Emperor's silent awakening, an event so rare that even the custodians treated it as myth. Something in Obi-Wan's presence, he said, had brushed against the Golden Throne's psychic storm. That alone warranted extreme caution. Obi-Wan offered the only truth he possessed. He had not come willingly. A wound in reality had torn him from his galaxy, flinging him into this one with no guidance or intent. But as he spoke, he saw in the custodian leader's unreadable posture that such explanations mattered little. What mattered was purpose, not origin. Sensors dimmed, the scanning lattice retracted. Attention settled over the chamber, dense as storm clouds gathering before lightning. The custodian leader issued a quiet order. The dais trembled, beginning a slow descent into the depths below. The guards followed, surrounding him once more. Obi-Wan sensed the truth before any words confirmed it. He was being taken somewhere far beyond interrogation or observation. Somewhere where the air itself vibrated with power so immense it seemed to warp the Force and the warp alike. Somewhere no outsider should ever be permitted to approach. The throne awaited him, and as the platform descended into the ancient, unseen heart of terror, that vast presence stirred again, no longer distant, no longer faint. It was awake, watching, and preparing to decide whether the stranger drawn across the stars was a threat, a tool, or something far more dangerous. A catalyst. The platform descended for what felt like an eternity, carrying Obi-Wan deeper into the bowels of the Imperial Palace. The air grew colder as they passed beneath layers of ancient stone and adamantine, each stratum infused with the psychic residue of millennia. The hum of machinery vibrated through the soles of his feet, a low, ceaseless heartbeat that seemed to echo the suffering of the world above. The Force, flickering, strained, barely coherent, pressed against him with a weight he had never known. It was as though the very planet grieved eternally, unable to exhale. Yet within that oppressive sorrow, something else pulsed with faint, fractured determination, guiding the descent like an unseen tether. When the platform finally halted, the custodians escorted him into a passage lit by dim crimson lumens. Carved into the walls were depictions of battles so vast and catastrophic they defied comprehension. He saw legions of armored warriors clashing beneath skies torn open by warp storms, worlds burning with the cold fire of demonic invasions, and a towering figure of radiant gold leading humanity across the stars. Each mural told a fragment of an unending struggle, a war not fought for victory but for survival. And in every image, hope was absent, replaced by grim defiance carved into the faces of warriors who knew no peace. Obi-Wan felt each depiction resonate with the Force, but the resonance was murky, distorted by a sickness that clung to the edges of perception. The suffering woven into these walls was not metaphorical. It lived within the stone itself. A Jedi trained to find light in even the darkest circumstances found himself searching for a glimmer here, and sensing only embers buried beneath mountains of ash. One custodian, walking slightly ahead of him, glanced back as if sensing his unease. Though the warrior did not speak, Obi-Wan felt the gravity in the man's posture. These were guardians who had witnessed humanity's despair firsthand and shouldered it without faltering. For a moment, the Jedi felt humbled by the depth of their burden. They entered a chamber vast enough to contain a starship hull. Its ceiling disappeared into shadow, while walkways spiraled upward toward unseen heights. Choirs of psychers knelt at circular platforms arranged like concentric rings around a colossal central shaft. Their bodies trembled under the strain of continuous chanting, their voices melding into a single, droning prayer that pressed itself into Obi-Wan's chest. The psychic pressure emanating from them was suffocating. These individuals were not merely meditating. They were feeding their minds into an engine beyond comprehension. He watched as attendants moved among them, adjusting restraints, whispering solemn devotions, collecting the lifeless bodies of those who had already given too much. The force recoiled, as though in mourning. A custodian murmured that this was but one choir of many, each a flickering candle sacrificed daily to fuel the Imperium's desperate need for direction. Obi-Wan could hardly fathom a galaxy where navigation itself demanded such suffering. In his own world, the Force guided starships with grace and clarity. Here, the very act of travel was a torment borne by unwilling souls. He felt then a new weight settling over him, not physical, but moral. This galaxy had been shaped by unending war, its people ground down by horrors no civilization should endure. Even the Jedi Order, with all its flaws, had never faced a conflict so total, so absolute, that its cost devoured entire populations day after day. The custodians moved him onward, their silence deepening as they approached another gate, this one smaller but marked by glyphs that radiated authority. As it opened, the air thickened, heavy with incense and ancient dust. Here the murals changed. Instead of war, they depicted sacrifice. Men and women ascending toward a brilliant figure, offering their souls, their minds, their bodies. The Emperor, radiant yet sorrowful, accepted each gift with a solemnity carved into the very stone. Obi-Wan slowed, struck by the expressions sculpted upon the Emperor's face. It was not triumph nor divine indifference. It was grief, profound, infinite, unending, as though even the ruler of this vast empire understood the terrible price of survival. The custodian leader spoke then, his voice quiet but resonant. He told Obi-Wan that the Imperium was an empire of necessity, not glory. That humanity had teetered on the brink of extinction more times than could be counted. That the Emperor's dream had been shattered long ago, leaving only a grim continuation powered by sacrifice. His tone carried neither pride nor apology, only truth. Obi-Wan listened, absorbing every word. The comparison between this world and the fallen Republic was inevitable, yet painful. He had watched a democracy collapse under fear and manipulation. But even in its darkest hours, the galaxy he knew had never surrendered hope entirely. Here, hope was a luxury long extinguished. They moved again, entering a narrower corridor where the air hummed with psychic static. Obi-Wan felt that distant presence once more, stronger now, reaching through the turbulence, brushing the edges of his consciousness with a mixture of curiosity and warning. It was not the Force as he understood it, but something older, more fractured, bound by suffering and willpower. Every step he took seemed to pull him closer to its source. The corridor opened into a final descent, a spiraling ramp that plunged into darkness lit by flickering torches. The custodian's armor glowed faintly in the low light, turning them into spectral sentinels, escorting him deeper toward fate. Obi-Wan's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the overwhelming sense of purpose building around him. He had not been brought here merely as a prisoner. Something else awaited him, something that had shaped the entire Imperium and now stretched across the warp to acknowledge his presence. As the final torch guttered behind them, plunging the ramp into a dim red glow emanating from the depths below, Obi-Wan felt the truth settle upon him like a mantle of cold iron. He was descending toward the force that held this galaxy together, toward the suffering heart of humanity, toward the golden throne itself. The spiraling descent ended in a cavernous expanse where the air itself seemed to tremble. A faint red luminescence rose from vents carved into the ancient stone, casting the chamber in a perpetual twilight that felt neither alive nor dead. Obi-Wan stepped forward under the custodian's silent guidance, feeling the atmosphere grow heavier with every breath, as though each inhalation pressed him deeper beneath an invisible weight. The Force, already strained and distorted, convulsed at the edges of his perception. Something vast was stirring ahead, vast and wounded, yet immeasurably powerful. The path led them through a colonnade of enormous pillars, each carved with depictions of the Emperor in radiant glory, wreathed in light that defied the darkness of the surrounding ages. But these carvings bore another layer beneath their reverent surface, the faint etchings of cracks, as if the stone itself had begun to fracture under the burden of what it protected. Obi-Wan traced one with his eyes, sensing a sorrow embedded in the mineral veins, a memory of despair that had seeped into the architecture over thousands of years. He wondered what kind of being inspired such awe and such grief simultaneously. Ahead, a low drone rose from the floor, mechanical, organic, and psychic all at once. It pulsed like a heartbeat, forced to continue beating against its will. Each vibration reverberated in Obi-Wan's bones. The custodians tightened formation, halberds angled as if entering a sacred battlefield. With each step, the overwhelming presence at the edge of his mind grew, sharper, like a blinding light glimpsed through closing eyelids. Then the chamber opened. It was not a room, but a continent of metal, machinery, and living fire. The golden throne towered above them, an impossibly intricate construct of impossible scale. Layers of sculpted gold, adamantine, blessed alloys, and technology beyond any epoch Obi-Wan had known melded into a single structure that seemed less crafted than grown from purpose itself. Cables thicker than starship hulls extended from its flanks like roots, disappearing into caverns of shadow where engines roared with the fury of imprisoned suns. Countless servitors tended the surrounding mechanisms, pale, hollow-eyed remnants of humanity fused to sacred machinery, chanting code prayers in broken monotone. And upon the throne sat the Emperor. Obi-Wan froze, breath catching as his eyes lifted toward the immense figure. The Emperor's body, vast, skeletal, sustained only by relentless machinery, glowed with a brilliance both divine and agonizing. A crown of golden circuitry encased his skull, feeding conduits of psychic fire that arced through the chamber in thin, luminous strands. His remaining flesh was a cathedral of scars. His form radiated both unbearable suffering and sheer, indomitable will. Light poured from him in waves that distorted the air, bending reality itself around his presence. Obi-Wan felt his knees weaken, not from fear, but from the sheer immensity of the being before him. This was no Sith Lord twisted by ambition or hatred, no Jedi Master guided by serenity. This was a will so monumental it seemed to replace the very concept of fate. The Force trembled under his existence, recoiling from his agony while simultaneously drawn toward his purpose. The custodians knelt with unified reverence, heads bowed. Obi-Wan, though not compelled by any custom of this world, found himself sinking to one knee simply to withstand the pressure radiating from the Emperor's form. The presence he had sensed since arriving, the one that had reached across the warp to touch his mind, was here, concentrated with such magnitude that it felt like staring into the heart of a dying star. A voice entered his mind. It was not spoken. It did not echo. It existed as a truth revealed without sound. It carried neither warmth nor malice, only inevitability. Obi-Wan felt his consciousness pulled forward, as though the Emperor's will reached through layers of reality to examine every memory, every moment of conviction, every scar etched into his soul. It was not an interrogation. It was an unveiling. Images flashed before him. The Jedi Temple rising under a clear sky. Anakin laughing in childhood innocence. The Clone Wars raging across 1,000 worlds. The fire of Mustafar consuming the brother he once called friend. Each memory was touched, weighed, and left intact, but the process felt like a blade slicing through layers of self. For the first time since losing his apprentice, Obi-Wan felt utterly disarmed, not by power, but by understanding. The Emperor's fragmented consciousness pulsed again. It did not speak in words, but in impressions. Recognition, curiosity, sorrow, and a distant echo of something akin to kinship. Obi-Wan sensed that the Emperor perceived him not as intruder or threat, but as an anomaly, an echo of a world where balance once existed, where hope had not yet been crushed beneath millennia of bloodshed. And beneath that recognition lingered a deeper, darker undercurrent. The Emperor's existence was sustained not by life, but by endless sacrifice. The throne devoured souls to keep him tethered to reality, and through him, humanity clung to existence by a thread. Obi-Wan's heart clenched as he felt the psychic agony radiating from the throne. It was infinite, unending, an agony endured not for glory but for necessity. He had seen suffering in war, but never suffering willingly embraced for the sake of trillions. The Force surged weakly around him, frightened and reverent at once. Then the Emperor focused his will, and the chamber trembled. Obi-Wan's vision dimmed as reality seemed to fold inward. The empire of mankind, the Jedi Order, the Warp, and the Force blurred into a single, terrible question, posed by a god chained to eternity. Why have you come? Obi-Wan did not know the answer, but he sensed that the Emperor already did, and that whatever purpose had dragged him here across the fabric of galaxies was only beginning to unfold. The light intensified, swallowing his senses, until all that remained was the haunting certainty that nothing in either universe would remain unchanged by this meeting. The light that swallowed Obi-Wan did not blind him, it unmade him. His awareness stretched, as if pulled through strands of existence finer than silk, each thread humming with memories that were not his own. He felt the Emperor's will around him, not a presence confined to the withered body on the throne, but an ocean of fractured consciousness spreading across the warp like a storm that had forgotten how to rest. It enveloped him with the weight of millennia, touching every part of his mind with a precision that bordered on cruelty, yet carried a strange, somber reverence. Obi-Wan tried to anchor himself, to remember the temple halls, the laughter of younglings, the scent of ion smoke on the winds of battles he had survived. But each memory flickered beneath the Emperor's scrutiny, examined not with curiosity, but with necessity. The Emperor sought to understand him fully, instantly, with no regard for the frailty of mortal thought. Obi-Wan felt a pressure behind his eyes, a psychic force that threatened to split him apart like fragile glass under a hammer. Then the Emperor saw Anakin. The image blazed unbidden in Obi-Wan's mind, his former apprentice standing before him, a boy with limitless potential, a young man blazing with hope, a warrior descending into ruin. The fire of Mustafar roared around them, the heat of betrayal searing through time. Obi-Wan felt his throat tighten as the memory resurfaced with unbearable clarity, and he felt the Emperor recoil, not in fear, but in recognition. This wound, this tragedy, this failed redemption echoed something deep within the shattered remnants of his own past. The sensation rippled outward, stirring ancient grief like dust rising from an abandoned tomb. Another memory surfaced, the moment Obi-Wan cradled newborn Luke and Leia, the last hope of a dying age. This time, the psychic air vibrated with something like curiosity. Hope was a foreign concept here, a relic extinguished centuries before the Imperium's birth. Yet the Emperor regarded it with a focus that unsettled him, as though examining a long-forgotten artifact. The chamber around them dimmed as the psychic storm intensified. The custodians stood immovable, though even they seemed to brace themselves as the Emperor's will coiled tighter. Obi-Wan felt his consciousness drag deeper, drawn toward the heart of a mind cracked by endless war and sustained by relentless sacrifice. He sensed fragments of the Emperor's memories, armies marching beneath a golden sky, worlds reclaimed in triumphant unity, betrayal erupting like a knife through creation. For an instant, Obi-Wan glimpsed the Emperor not as a god, but as a man who had once tried to forge peace from chaos and paid an unimaginable price for it. The realization hollowed him. The Emperor's voice struck him again, not words, but a surge of meaning so powerful it left him trembling. The message carried weight, intention, urgency. The Emperor had not asked why Obi-Wan had come. He already knew the Jedi was cast here by forces beyond either of their control. Instead, he sought to decide whether Obi-Wan could exist in this universe without unraveling it. The Force shuddered, struggling under the Emperor's scrutiny. Obi-Wan felt the connection weakening, fraying as though threads were being severed by the raw intensity of the Emperor's psychic grasp. He gasped as pain shot through him, a cold fire that raced down his spine. The Emperor was not attacking him. The sheer magnitude of his examination was enough to tear lesser minds apart. Obi-Wan clung to calm, to breath, to the disciplines of the Jedi that had carried him through war and heartbreak. The Emperor paused, not in hesitation, but in thought. The waves of his mind shifted, probing not Obi-Wan's memories, but the essence of what he was. A guardian shaped by compassion, a warrior tempered by restraint, a survivor burdened by failure yet still seeking to serve. The Emperor weighed these truths against the brutal calculus of the Imperium, a realm where mercy often led to ruin, and where hope was as dangerous as heresy. The air thickened. Obi-Wan sensed the Emperor shaping a question, not spoken, but forged in intent. A vision unfurled before him. Humanity consumed by warp fire, the Astronomicon extinguished. Terror, collapsing into a vortex of demonic hunger. Another vision followed. Obi-Wan standing among the custodians, guiding armies, reshaping destinies. Still another. Obi-Wan falling to corruption, the warp twisting his gifts into weapons of unimaginable destruction. None of these were futures. They were possibilities, laid bare by a mind incapable of guessing and compelled to calculate every outcome. Obi-Wan felt a tremor of fear, not for himself, but for what the Emperor might force upon him. Then, like a sudden breath after drowning, the pressure eased. The Emperor withdrew his psychic grasp, though the remnants still crackled in the air like lightning trapped beneath glass. Obi-Wan staggered, catching himself before he fell. The custodians watched in unbroken silence, their disciplined stoicism masking whether they viewed him now as ally, danger, or something they had never encountered. The Emperor's gaze, though blind, though bound to machinery, felt as present as a hand upon Obi-Wan's shoulder. A final impression passed between them, one of weary acknowledgement. The Emperor had seen enough to judge him for now, though that judgment remained locked behind the impenetrable fortress of his thoughts. Obi-Wan exhaled slowly, though his body still trembled from the experience. The Force flickered uncertainly around him, unsettled but not severed. He sensed no hostility, yet neither acceptance nor rejection, only anticipation. The air around the throne shifted, and a low hum rose from the surrounding machinery. The Emperor's will pressed outward, directing the custodians. They stepped forward to escort Obi-Wan away, though none spoke. The Emperor had not released him, merely moved him to the next stage of whatever test this universe intended. As they guided him toward a shadowed archway that led deeper into the palace's unseen depths, Obi-Wan felt the echoes of that incomprehensible mind linger in his thoughts. The encounter was not over. It had only begun. The custodians led Obi-Wan from the throne chamber with the same implacable precision as before, yet something in their demeanor had shifted. They no longer regarded him merely as an anomaly or intruder. Their posture, their silence, the faint tension in their steps, all hinted at a deeper awareness that the Emperor himself had touched this stranger's mind and left no decree, only possibility. Possibility in the Imperium was dangerous. Possibility demanded judgment. Possibility required testing. They guided him through a vast archway into a labyrinthine passage lined with relics from wars long buried beneath human memory. Armor shattered by weapons no longer forged, banners stained by wars fought on forgotten worlds, and tomes sealed with sigils that radiated faint psychic heat. Obi-Wan felt the Force stir uneasily around these remnants, recoiling from echoes of violence that still clung to them like dried blood. He sensed the pain of warriors who had perished defending an empire that would never know peace. Every object seemed to whisper of lives consumed by necessity. The corridor narrowed until they reached a door of blackened adamantine, inscribed with runes so old they no longer resembled language. The custodian leader paused, laying a gauntleted hand upon the metal. It responded with a muted vibration, as though awakening from centuries of stillness. With a groan that reverberated through the bones of the palace, the door slid open, revealing a chamber empty except for a circular platform illuminated from above by a single lance of white light. Obi-Wan sensed the change instantly. The air in this chamber did not carry the weight of incense or ancient machinery. It felt raw, cold, untouched by life. The Force trembled, alert and wary. Something was watching from beyond the veil, something vast, yet indistinct, lingering like a ghost at the edge of comprehension. The custodian leader gestured. Obi-Wan stepped slowly onto the platform, its smooth surface humming softly beneath his feet. The light intensified, surrounding him in a pale radiance that swallowed the chamber. He looked toward the custodians, but their forms blurred, stretched, then dissolved entirely as though erased by an unseen hand. The platform vanished beneath him. The air vanished. The ground vanished. He stood suddenly beneath a sky torn open by warp storms, their crimson lightning shredding the heavens like burning scars. A battlefield sprawled before him, vast plains of ash, trenches filled with the ruins of tanks forged in forgotten forges, banners flapping over skeletal remains. The air tasted of iron and smoke. A void ship burned as it fell, a blazing trail marking its final descent into ruin. Obi-Wan took a breath, feeling the Force resonate with terrible familiarity. This was not a memory of his own. This was history, Imperial history, drawn into shape not by his imagination, but by the Emperor's mind. A distant horn sounded, low and mournful. From the far ridge, silhouettes emerged. Warriors in power armor bearing the Imperial Aquila, their steps heavy with exhaustion. Their armor was battered, smeared with the black residue of warp corruption. Yet their discipline remained unwavering. Obi-Wan recognized courage in their movements, but also something far more tragic, a resignation that this battle, like countless before it, would end not in triumph, but in survival purchased at unbearable cost. Then the enemy appeared. From fissures in the earth crawled creatures of the warp, twisted abominations of horn and sinew, their shapes shifting as though sculpted from nightmares. They surged forward, shrieking with voices that rattled the air. The Space Marines raised bolters, unleashing thunderous volleys that tore the first wave apart in sprays of ichor. But for every creature slain, 3 more clawed their way from the churning ground. Obi-Wan ignited his lightsaber by instinct. Its hum reverberated across the battlefield, a rare note of purity amid the cacophony. He stepped forward, ready to join the fray. But the Force resisted him. The scene was not meant to be altered. He felt an invisible boundary hold him in place, compelling him to watch. This was not a test of combat. It was a revelation. The Marines fought with unyielding resolve, their movements a blend of brutal efficiency and unspoken despair. One fell beneath a demon's claws. Another charged forward, detonating a plasma grenade in a suicidal attempt to stem the tide. Obi-Wan felt each death as though the Force itself mourned them. The Emperor showed him not glory but sacrifice, a sacrifice demanded not by ambition, but by a galaxy that refused to offer any other choice. The vision shifted with a wrenching pull. The battlefield dissolved into a frozen wasteland, where ranks of Imperial guardsmen fired laser guns at an armored behemoth stride across the ice. Their shots were pitiful sparks against its hide. As the monster barreled into them, Obi-Wan heard their cries echo through the Force, cries of soldiers who knew they would die, yet did not break formation. Again, the vision tore away. Now he stood upon a scorched world, where titanic machines battled across molten plains, their footfalls shaking the crust. Above them, a warp rift widened, spewing demons like a ruptured wound in reality. Obi-Wan reached instinctively for calm, for clarity, but the Force here was a roiling storm. The Emperor was showing him not a single war, but war itself. Endless, devouring, inescapable. The visions were not meant to frighten him. They were meant to teach. The Imperium fought not for victory, but for existence. A final vision swallowed him. He stood before a golden figure clad in radiant armor. An image of the Emperor as he once walked among men, whole and unbroken. The Emperor raised his sword toward the horizon, where darkness swallowed entire systems. His voice thundered through Obi-Wan's mind, not in words, but in truth. Mankind had never known peace, only the fragile illusion of respite between calamities. Every triumph bought time. Every sacrifice delayed annihilation. Hope was not a constant. It was a spark sustained by the will of the dying. The golden figure faded. Obi-Wan fell to his knees as the chamber returned around him, breath shaking, body trembling with the immensity of what he had witnessed. The custodians watched in silence, and he realized the purpose of this trial. The Emperor had shown him the Imperium's soul. And now the question loomed. What role would he play within it? The chamber lights dimmed, signaling that the test was not yet finished. The next revelation waited, already gathering in the shadows beyond. The chamber's dimness thickened until it felt like a living shroud, and Obi-Wan remained motionless, breathing through the tremor that lingered from the visions. The echoes of 10,000 wars still pulsed faintly in his ears, like distant waves crashing upon some unseen shore. He steadied himself, drawing on instinct as a Jedi would, seeking clarity, reaching for the familiar flow of the Force to anchor his thoughts. But the moment he opened himself to it, he felt the universe recoil. It was not rejection. It was distortion. The force here was not the calm, connective presence he had known throughout his life. It was wounded, shredded by centuries of psychic warfare, poisoned by the ceaseless storms of the warp, and suffocated beneath the Emperor's vast, struggling beacon. Where once he had sensed life and intention in every breath, he now felt the fractured remnants of countless souls dissolved into the psychic tempest that enveloped the Imperium. There were whispers, ragged, faint, fragmented beyond understanding. Some cried out in pain. Others repeated prayers until their voices crumbled into silence. Still others clawed against unseen boundaries, devoured by forces Obi-Wan sensed only as shadows. He drew his hand closer to his chest, startled by the intensity of the interference. Never had the Force felt so treacherous. Even on Mustafar, amid the burning wrath of betrayal and loss, he had never feared touching it. But here, the moment he reached deeper, he felt something coil around his thoughts, an oily pressure that slid like smoke beneath the surface of his awareness. It was not the dark side as he knew it. It was something older, something inherently wrong, as though the warp had crept into the Force like a disease. Obi-Wan withdrew sharply, heart pounding. The custodians watched him without comment, but their silent attention made it clear they had expected this. They understood the palace's psychic weight better than any mortal could. They served the Emperor in the shadow of his vast mind, moving through a reality where every breath was pressed beneath divine burden. The chamber around him brightened slightly as ancient machinery awakened. Runes along the walls flickered to life, casting pale blue glyphs that danced in slow, deliberate patterns. The custodian leader stepped forward, tapping the haft of his halberd against the floor in ritual acknowledgement. Obi-Wan felt a subtle shift in the air, as though the chamber had begun to respond to his presence. He sensed, faintly, that the Emperor was watching once more. Obi-Wan attempted to calm his breathing, to re-establish the meditative focus that had guided him since childhood. He closed his eyes, centered himself, and whispered inwardly the old Jedi teachings. He expected resistance. Instead, he felt the warp itself stir, as if his attempt to summon serenity had rippled across the psychic storm, awakening attention from unseen depths. A cold wind seemed to sweep through the chamber, tugging at the hem of his robe. It wasn't real wind. There was no airflow, no movement, but it brushed against him like a warning carried through another dimension. He inhaled sharply. The Force thrashed around him, no longer merely distorted, but agitated, as if offended by his attempt to shape it. Then, before he could retreat, something pressed against his mind. A whisper, formless yet urgent. He stiffened. The custodians tensed, their halberds shifting minutely, though none moved toward him. They sensed something, but not what he did. The whisper wasn't a voice, not even a thought. It was a sensation, a surge of emotion born from the warp's relentless hunger, hatred, despair, ancient longing. Countless tormented impressions wrapped together in a net of psychic residue that tugged at him with intrusive familiarity. And beneath the chaos, faint as a star glimpsed through storm clouds, he sensed the Emperor's presence attempting to shield him. Not completely, only narrowly, holding back the turbulent tides long enough for the Jedi to understand the truth. The Force here could not be trusted. It could not be wielded without consequence. Obi-Wan staggered back a step, forcing himself to sever the connection before he slipped deeper into the warp's grasp. The break was jarring, like tearing loose from a snare. He gasped softly, sweat beading at his temples. The custodians exchanged subtle glances, acknowledging without words that he had survived something unseen. But the Emperor was not finished with him. The chamber shifted again. Light swirled across its surface, forming shapes that flickered between coherence and dissolution. Obi-Wan felt a gentle pull, different from the warp's malevolence, steadier, more controlled. It guided him toward understanding. This was no illusion crafted to deceive. It was a lesson. He sensed the Emperor's will shaping the flow around him, revealing the contrast between the Force as Obi-Wan knew it and the psychic reality of the Imperium. The Emperor did not speak, yet the meaning resonated unmistakably. The Force could exist here, but only through struggle, only through discipline more absolute than anything Obi-Wan had ever required. And even then, using it risked drawing the attention of horrors that drifted through the warp like predators sensing a wounded creature. The revelation chilled him. A Jedi without the Force was still a warrior, still a thinker, still a servant of peace. But a Jedi who touched the Force and invited corruption unknowingly, such an individual could become catastrophic. He had seen it before. He had watched Anakin fall. And here, in this universe, the fall would not be to ambition or anger, but to the warp itself. A corruption so complete that even the concept of redemption would cease to exist. Obi-Wan exhaled slowly, steadying his mind. The Emperor's lesson was brutally clear. The Jedi path offered no sanctuary in this galaxy. Yet the fact that the Emperor guided him at all suggested something even more unsettling, that he believed Obi-Wan might still serve a purpose. As the psychic pressure faded, Obi-Wan lifted his gaze. The custodian stepped back, forming a path for him to follow. The chamber doors rumbled open, revealing a long corridor shimmering with faint warp light that clung to the edges of perception like frost. His trial was not over. The next test would force him to act, not as observer, but as participant, walking a razor's edge between survival and damnation. And somewhere, waiting in the shadows of that path, Obi-Wan felt the warp stirring in anticipation. The corridor stretched before him like a vein carved into the bones of terror, lit by alternating bands of pale lumens and shadow so deep it seemed to swallow sound. Obi-Wan walked in measured silence, guided by the custodians who flanked him with unwavering vigilance. Though they gave no command and spoke no judgment, he felt the weight of their scrutiny with every step. His earlier attempt to touch the Force still lingered as a faint ache behind his eyes, a reminder that even a moment's discipline could unravel into peril. Yet the Emperor had guided him onward, not away from danger, but toward a truth that had yet to reveal itself. The corridor bent sharply, opening into a vast hall where mechanized chanting rolled across the air like an endless tide. Rows of attendants in crimson robes tended to towering stasis capsules arranged in perfect, concentric formations. Within each capsule floated a child, fragile, unconscious, and surrounded by sigils glowing faintly with psychic suppression. Their faces were serene, untouched by knowledge of the doom engraved into their very existence. Obi-Wan halted, struck by the sight. These were not machines, nor warriors, nor relics of battle. They were simply children. The custodian stepped aside, granting him a clear view. He approached slowly, sensing a gathering pressure in the chamber that made his skin tighten. The Force flickered with conflicting impressions: innocence, fear, potential, and a faint hum of raw psychic energy that pulsed within their small bodies like sparks waiting to ignite. Force sensitives, yet different. Wilder, threatened not by emotion, but by the warp chewing at the edges of their unformed minds. A robed attendant turned toward a nearby capsule and began adjusting glyphs on its control panel. The child inside convulsed faintly, as though reacting to the change. Obi-Wan stepped forward instinctively. "What is being done to them?" His voice was low yet steady. The attendant stiffened but did not meet his eyes. "Sanctioning," he murmured. "Those whose potential exceeds containment must be purged. It is mercy to prevent their corruption." Mercy. The word struck him with unexpected force. He had seen what the warp did to minds unprotected. He had sensed its hunger, its insidious pull, its desire to twist anything it touched. But these were children, innocent, untouched by choice or sin. Their futures were not yet written. A second attendant approached another capsule, activating a sequence that dimmed the glyphs around the child inside. Obi-Wan felt the shift before he understood it. The chamber's psychic field thickened. The child's breathing faltered. A faint cry echoed through the force, barely more than a tremor, but it pierced him with the clarity of a blade. Without thinking, Obi-Wan moved. He stepped between the attendant and the capsule, raising a hand, not in aggression, but in unmistakable refusal. The custodians reacted instantly, halberds lowering, boots pounding across the floor as they formed a tense perimeter around him. The attendants froze, bewildered and terrified. Obi-Wan's voice carried the calm steel of a Jedi Master. "This child is alive. You cannot extinguish a life simply because you fear what it may become." The custodian leader approached him slowly. His presence radiated authority sharpened by centuries of loyalty. "You do not understand the peril," he said, his voice a quiet thunder. "A psyker left unbound may doom a world. One child is a small sacrifice compared to the fall of billions." Obi-Wan felt the truth in his words, but also the despair. The Imperium did not shape its laws from cruelty. It shaped them from necessity. Yet necessity could blind even the virtuous, and something in him refused to yield to the cold arithmetic of fear. "I fought a war," Obi-Wan answered softly. "I have seen potential twisted into ruin, but I've also seen it rise into hope. If there is a chance to save them, even one, should it not be taken?" The custodians did not move. Their armor glinted faintly beneath the chamber's luminescent glow, turning them into statues of judgment. The tension thickened, ready to snap into violence with the slightest impulse. But before any blade fell, the air trembled. A psychic ripple spread through the hall, gentle yet immense, like the distant resonance of a great bell tolling beyond the veil of reality. The glyphs on the capsules flickered. The auric eyes of the custodians dimmed. The attendants dropped to their knees, bowing their heads in reverence and fear. The Emperor's awareness touched the chamber. Obi-Wan did not feel the overwhelming pressure of earlier, nor the piercing examination of the throne room. This was different, lighter, yet sharper. A single note of curiosity, threaded with the faintest echo of caution. The Emperor had seen what he had done, and he had not stopped him. Obi-Wan understood the meaning immediately. The Emperor was not forbidding him to act, nor granting permission. He was observing, waiting, measuring the consequences of a single choice made by a stranger from another universe. The psychic tremor faded. Light returned. The custodians slowly lowered their weapons. The leader regarded Obi-Wan with unreadable scrutiny. "Mercy," he said quietly, "is a dangerous act in the Imperium." "Not mercy," Obi-Wan replied. "Discipline, compassion without recklessness, justice without fear. These are the principles that guide us." The custodian studied him for a long moment, then turned to the attendants. "This child is to be held for further evaluation. No purging without explicit command." The attendants bowed and obeyed with trembling urgency. Obi-Wan exhaled, though he did not allow himself relief. The Emperor's intervention was not approval, it was acknowledgement. His actions had drawn attention, and attention in this world was perilous. Yet he felt no regret. His path as a Jedi demanded he act. Even in the shadow of consequences he did not yet understand. As the custodians guided him from the hall, he sensed something shifting behind him. A faint flicker in the Force, fragile but undeniable. Hope. In a place where hope was nearly extinct, but hope in the Imperium, however small, could ignite suspicion. And somewhere in the depths of the palace, unseen yet already moving, wheels began to turn. Wheels belonging to individuals who did not believe mercy was a virtue at all. Obi-Wan had been noticed by more than the Emperor. He had been noticed by the Inquisition. The custodians led Obi-Wan through a rising series of vaulted passages whose walls seemed to pulse faintly with the aftershocks of the Emperor's distant psychic resonance. The hall of the condemned Psyker children faded behind him, yet the weight of what had transpired remained heavy on his shoulders. A single act of compassion, so ordinary within the Jedi Order, had become a stone hurled into the abyss of Imperial doctrine. Its ripples spread invisibly through terror, brushing against minds trained to sense deviation with predatory instinct. Even before he reached the next junction, Obi-Wan felt a shift in the air. It was subtle, like a cold thread drawn across the back of his mind. Someone was watching, not with the Emperor's boundless scrutiny, nor the custodian's disciplined vigilance, but with a focus honed by suspicion sharpened into conviction. He slowed slightly, letting his senses expand without touching the Force too deeply. The custodians noticed the hesitation, pausing long enough for one to glance down the corridor behind them, though he saw nothing with mortal eyes. They resumed walking, but the presence followed. It clung to the edges of the path like a shadow learning how to move. When they emerged into a chamber of towering data altars, the custodian leader spoke for the first time since the incident. "Something has taken interest. Walk with caution, stranger." His tone held no fear, only the certainty of a man stating the direction of the wind. Obi-Wan bowed his head slightly in acknowledgement, though neither comfort nor confidence stirred within him. The chamber was a cathedral of knowledge. Vaults filled with illuminated relic scrolls, cogitators clicking softly as they passed ancient records, and servitors inscribing new lines of data in endless repetition. Yet within this sea of secrets, a single figure drew the eye immediately. Clad in robes the color of dried blood, armored beneath with plates etched in holy sigils, and bearing a rosette that gleamed like an accusation, stood an inquisitor. His eyes were twin embers in an otherwise solemn, hollowed face, not burning with zealotry, something far colder. Calculation. Judgment already half written. He did not bow to the custodians, nor did they acknowledge him beyond a respectful shift of stance. Each authority recognized the other, but neither submitted. The Inquisitor regarded Obi-Wan with the interest of a man studying a relic suspected of corruption. "Stranger," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of many executions, "you disrupted an authorized purgation." Obi-Wan met the man's gaze calmly. "I protected a child from death." "In the Imperium," the Inquisitor replied, "the two are not always different." The custodian leader stepped forward slightly, a subtle assertion of territorial authority. "He acts under the Emperor's observation," he stated. "Your inquiry will wait." "Nothing waits," the Inquisitor murmured. "Not when the warp stirs." His gaze narrowed, flicking across Obi-Wan's posture, his breathing, the tremor of psychic disturbance that lingered like invisible dust upon his presence. I felt the fluctuation, a surge of power unlike any sanctioned discipline. You attempted sorcery. Obi-Wan shook his head. I reached for what my people call the Force. It is not sorcery. In this galaxy, the Inquisitor answered, intent is irrelevant. Method is everything. Attention coiled through the chamber, not loud, not visible, but sharp enough that even the servitors stalled in their tasks. The custodians shifted subtly, forming a tighter perimeter around Obi-Wan without fully encircling him. They were prepared to defend him if the Emperor willed it, yet ready to kill him if the Emperor wished otherwise. Obi-Wan sensed the fine line he walked between trust and annihilation. The Inquisitor stepped closer, robes sweeping the marble like ash dragged across stone. Your mercy, your anomaly of power, your interference, and your proximity to the throne. He studied Obi-Wan as though peeling away layers of flesh and thought. You are no mere wanderer cast through the warp. The Force stirred faintly at the accusation, vibrating with warning. Obi-Wan held himself steady. I arrived here against my will. I seek only understanding. Understanding is not our currency, the Inquisitor said. Survival is. Order is. Purity is. He paused, letting the severity of his doctrine settle into the silence. I have seen entire worlds fall because one unmonitored psyker whispered in their sleep. You, stranger, radiate a power I cannot quantify. Obi-Wan sensed the truth behind the words. The Inquisitor was not driven by malice or cruelty. He was driven by fear. Fear carved into faith, shaped into iron, weaponized through duty. The Jedi understood fear, but rarely fear refined into something so cold. The Inquisitor raised a hand, and a retinue of storm-armored warriors stepped from the shadows, acolytes trained to enforce his will with unhesitating precision. By my authority, I claim this individual for inquisitorial examination. The custodians blocked their path instantly. No, the leader said, voice resonant. The Emperor has not granted such authority. The Emperor does not speak, the Inquisitor answered, almost gently. He warns, he stirs, and today he stirred because of this man. Obi-Wan sensed the Inquisitor's resolve hardening, becoming brittle and dangerous. There would be no negotiation. The man saw a threat and would eliminate it, even at the risk of offending the custards themselves. Before the impasse could erupt into violence, a tremor shook the chamber, soft but unmistakable. The Emperor's presence brushed the air again, faint but clear, like the last note of a distant hymn. The Inquisitor stiffened, eyes widening for the span of a heartbeat. There was no command in that psychic ripple, no decree, only acknowledgement, directed not at him, but at Obi-Wan. The custodians stepped aside for a single breath span, then reformed, resolute. The message was clear enough. The Emperor had not sanctioned the Inquisitor's claim, but the Inquisitor was not dissuaded. If anything, the denial sharpened his resolve into obsession. He stepped back, inclining his head slightly toward Obi-Wan, though the gesture held no respect. Very well, he said softly. For now. He turned sharply, his entourage following like shadows torn from the walls. Yet before he disappeared into the corridor, he glanced over his shoulder, his final words carried like a blade hidden in silk. I will learn what you are, and when I do, no throne in the galaxy will shield you. The custodians resumed their march, guiding Obi-Wan deeper into the palace's labyrinth. But Obi-Wan felt the change in the air, the sense of being hunted, not by beasts of the warp, but by a man whose devotion was more dangerous than any demon. The Emperor had looked upon him. Now the Inquisition would not look away. The custodians pushed deeper into the labyrinth, their strides fast but controlled, as though they anticipated a threat they could not yet name. Obi-Wan followed, his mind troubled by the shadow of the Inquisitor, whose parting words seemed to cling to the air like ash. The Force trembled with unease, not from any clear warning, but from the oppressive silence that settled over the halls. Even the mechanical chant of distant servitors faded, as though the palace itself were holding its breath. The corridor narrowed and dipped into a descending ramp of black marble, veined with gold that pulsed faintly in rhythm with the palace's deep, ceaseless heartbeat. Obi-Wan noticed the change immediately. The temperature dropped. The walls breathed faint psychic residue that brushed his skin like icy fingers. The Force recoiled again, not in pain this time, but in sorrow so ancient it felt endless. They entered a cavernous reliquary illuminated by pale shafts of light descending from unseen heights. Rows of towering sarcophagi lined the chamber, each carved with the likeness of a warrior encased in armor whose design predated even the earliest days of the Imperium. Some were pristine, others were cracked, their interiors humming with residual psychic energy that seeped into the air like whispers from another era. The custodian leader lifted a gauntleted hand, signaling a halt. His gaze swept the shadowed aisles with quiet caution. "This place must be crossed," he murmured, "but danger lingers here. The dead do not sleep in peace." Obi-Wan frowned. The dead? One custodian turned his helm slightly. Souls bound to duty beyond death. Their armor remembers their purpose. Their minds do not always rest. Before Obi-Wan could respond, the chamber shifted. Not physically. The light remained still, the air unchanged. But the psychic presence in the room stirred like a beast awakened by a distant echo. Obi-Wan felt something ripple through the Force, a soft vibration, a memory resonating through metal and bone. Then a deeper tremor followed, and the reliquary doors slammed shut behind them. The custodians reacted instantly, halberds raised as they pivoted into a perfect protective formation around Obi-Wan. Their golden forms stood rigid, yet the tension radiating from them betrayed recognition. Someone was coming. Footsteps echoed between the sarcophagi, measured, unhurried, purposeful. A silhouette emerged from the shadows, flanked by two acolytes bearing lanterns filled with flickering warp light. Cloaked in dark crimson, armored in plates of runic black steel, the Inquisitor stepped into view as though the chamber had been waiting for him. "You moved too quickly," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on Obi-Wan, "almost as if you feared what I would learn." The custodian leader stepped forward. "You were not summoned here. Withdraw." "I go where heresy demands my presence," the Inquisitor replied. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with the unwavering certainty of a man who believed fate itself bowed to his purpose. And this man is heresy shaped into flesh. Obi-Wan felt the hostility ripple through the psychic stillness. The reliquary's dormant soul stirred again, reacting to the tension as if the chamber breathed through their ancient armor. Helmets along the walls turned imperceptibly, guided by instincts forged in forgotten wars. The Inquisitor extended his hand. Energy gathered at his fingertips. Warp light, sharp as broken glass and cold as a void storm. Obi-Wan knew instantly that it was no conventional psychic force. It clawed at the Force around him, distorting it, poisoning it. "Stand aside," the Inquisitor commanded. The custodians moved simultaneously, halberds cutting arcs of golden light as they formed an unbreakable barrier. Their discipline did not waver, but the Inquisitor was not deterred. "So be it," he whispered. His acolytes activated sigils that flared with violent luminosity, casting jagged shadows that twisted unnaturally across the chamber. Warp energy surged outward, rousing the dormant psychic imprints within the sarcophagi. Armor plates shuddered. Eye lenses flickered to life. Phantom voices murmured through the air like distant cries of soldiers who had not yet realized they were dead. The custodians charged. Their halberds met warp fire in a clash that shook dust from the ceiling. The Inquisitor's acolytes fell instantly beneath the Golden Warrior's assault, their bodies incinerated by precise, decisive blows. But the Inquisitor himself moved like a blade guided by inevitability. His hand swept upward, unleashing a torrent of psychic force that struck the custodians with the weight of a collapsing star. They staggered, something Obi-Wan had not believed possible. Obi-Wan ignited his lightsaber, its blue glow cutting through the crimson haze. The Inquisitor turned toward him, expression unreadable. "You wield power you do not understand," he said. "You should not exist." He thrust forward, unleashing a concentrated spear of warp light. Instinct overrode caution. Obi-Wan raised his blade, redirecting the blast in a brilliant arc that sent fractures skittering across the marble floor. The Inquisitor's eyes widened, not in fear, but in revelation. "So it can be shaped," he murmured. "Dangerous." He attacked again. Obi-Wan blocked, each impact sending tremors up his arms. The warp fought him with every strike, resisting the clarity of the Force, trying to seep into his mind through the blade's connection. He focused, breath steady, grounding himself in the last remnants of discipline he could trust. The reliquary responded to the battle. Ancient armor stirred. Some figures rose from their sarcophagi as spectral silhouettes, their forms shaped by lingering psychic residue bound to their war-forged shells. They did not attack, but they moved, drifting through the chamber like silent ghosts drawn to the clash of power. The Inquisitor attempted a final thrust, a wave of psychic force meant to overwhelm rather than wound. Obi-Wan's saber carved through it, splitting the energy and sending it crashing into a column that collapsed with thunderous ruin. Dust filled the air. The chamber shook. The Inquisitor staggered, cloak torn, breath ragged. And in that moment, Obi-Wan sensed it. The man's core was not hatred. It was fear shaped into unyielding certainty. Fear of the warp, fear of corruption, fear of anything that defied the Imperium's brittle, necessary order. The custodians recovered, surrounding the Inquisitor. He did not resist this time. Blood trickled from his lip, but his gaze remained locked on Obi-Wan, unbroken in its resolve. "This ends only one way," he said quietly. "Your existence will doom us all." The custodian leader stepped forward. "Enough. Leave this sanctum." The Inquisitor allowed himself to be escorted away, but as he crossed the threshold, he turned his gaze one last time toward Obi-Wan. The whisper of his final thought brushed the chamber like cold smoke. "I will return." Then he vanished into the shadows, leaving the reliquary trembling with the echoes of war and prophecy. Obi-Wan exhaled slowly, extinguishing his blade. The custodians remained silent, but their posture revealed a truth more terrible than any threat. The Inquisitor had not been defeated, only delayed. Silence settled over the reliquary after the Inquisitor's departure, the kind of silence that followed calamity rather than peace. Dust drifted in slow spirals, illuminated by pale beams of light that pierced the darkness like distant memories. The spectral echoes of ancient warriors stirred by the confrontation, gradually withdrew into the sarcophagi that had housed their remnants for millennia. Their faint presences retreated like ripples fading across a still lake, leaving behind a chamber heavy with the residue of conflict. Obi-Wan steadied himself, exhaling in a controlled breath as he deactivated his lightsaber. The final clash still resonated through his arms, but it was the psychic interference that lingered more stubbornly. The warp-touched energy of the Inquisitor's assaults clung to the very air like invisible soot, clashing subtly against Obi-Wan's familiar patterns of control. He reached inward to re-establish balance, only to feel that same resistance, that thickened distortion of the Force, pushing back against his attempt at clarity. He did not force the connection. He merely breathed, allowing calm to seep in through patience rather than exertion. The custodian leader approached, his towering form outlined by faint gold reflections from the relics around them. "The Inquisitor will not relent," he said, his voice low, reverent, and edged with a tension Obi-Wan had not heard before. "You have drawn too much attention in too little time." "I did not come here seeking conflict," Obi-Wan answered, "but I cannot ignore suffering when it stands before me." "That is not how this galaxy survives," the custodian replied, though he did not speak the words with condemnation. If anything, they carried the solemn weight of truth carved into his soul. They resumed their march, weaving through the vast reliquary as echoes of their footsteps merged with the chamber's hushed reverberations. As they passed the ancient sarcophagi, Obi-Wan sensed faint impressions, fleeting emotions, fragments of loyalty, pride, and the ghostly remnants of war-worn spirits. They did not speak, yet their silent presence felt like an unspoken benediction, or perhaps a warning. The corridor beyond the reliquary was narrow, its walls etched with sigils meant to contain psychic disturbances from the chambers they had just left. Obi-Wan felt the oppressive pressure begin to ease, though not entirely. Each step carried a peculiar vibration, the floor humming with an energy he recognized only by its overwhelming magnitude. The Emperor was near again. The custodians led him toward a cylindrical lift lined in polished steel. As it ascended, Obi-Wan felt the faint presence growing stronger, brushing across his mind like a distant storm gathering its strength. Yet this time, it did not carry the crushing weight of earlier. It was lighter, more focused, like a single thread cast from a vast tapestry. The lift opened into a dimly lit hall where towering pillars upheld a ceiling lost in shadow. Incense smoke curled in thin trails from braziers placed at precise intervals, their glow washing the corridor in muted amber. Obi-Wan sensed something familiar in the air, though he couldn't place it. The Force, still strained, still wounded, seemed to stretch toward something ahead with cautious yearning. They stepped into a circular chamber lined with mosaics depicting the Emperor in eras long past, guiding humanity out of darkness, leading legions across shattered stars, standing firm against horrors far beyond mortal comprehension. But the final mosaic was incomplete, its golden center fractured into thin hairline veins radiating outward as though the image itself had shattered under the pressure of what it portrayed. Obi-Wan drifted closer, examining the cracks. As he did, the chamber dimmed further. The air thickened. A faint sound stirred, not a voice, not a whisper, but something akin to a single breath taken in a universe where gods rarely breathed at all. The Emperor's presence struck him like a tremor, not overwhelming, not intrusive, but deliberate. A single piercing filament of his vast consciousness brushed against Obi-Wan's mind, threading through the remnants of the earlier visions and the turmoil of the recent confrontation. It was not the Emperor's full voice, merely an echo, sparse and strained, yet sharp enough to slice through the denseness of the warp that clouded everything else. Obi-Wan gasped softly, steadying himself, as the custodians lowered their heads in reverence. The echo carried no image this time, no torrent of memory, no demand, only meaning, a warning. Obi-Wan felt it resonate through him, a sense of shifting paths, of danger approaching with the inevitable crawl of fate. The Inquisitor's obsession was only the spark. Greater forces, darker, older, were beginning to stir. His arrival had triggered more than curiosity. It had awakened attention from corners of the warp that even the Emperor could not ignore. The echo tightened, shaping itself around a single fragile utterance of intent. Not words, but clarity. You are not hidden. Obi-Wan's heart tightened as the implication struck him. His presence in this universe reverberated like a beacon through two intertwined realities, the force he carried and the warp that surrounded him. In attempting to shield himself, he drew more attention. In acting with compassion, he revealed more of who he was. His very existence was a paradox this galaxy did not understand, and thus could not contain. A second impression followed, gentler, burdened, almost mournful. Choices shape consequence. Obi-Wan bowed his head, understanding more than the Emperor had spoken. The fate of this galaxy was not yet binding him, but it was moving toward him, tendrils of destiny reaching with slow, inexorable intent. The echo faded, the chamber brightened. The Emperor withdrew, his presence thinning into the boundless psychic storm that sustained the Imperium. Obi-Wan staggered a half-step, breath trembling, the custodian leader steadying him with a silent, respectful gesture. "You have been touched by his mind again," the warrior said. "Few could endure that twice." Obi-Wan nodded faintly, though his thoughts churned. He sees something coming. The custodian's helm inclined. The Emperor sees everything that threatens humanity, and he sees paths even gods fear to tread. They continued down the corridor, but the air felt altered, charged with newfound dread and purpose. Obi-Wan sensed the horizon of his journey tilting, shifting towards something deeper, more unforgiving. And in the space between breaths, he understood the most haunting truth of all. The Emperor had not warned him to flee. He had warned him to prepare. The custodians led Obi-Wan down a narrowing corridor whose metallic walls hummed with a resonance that felt older than the Imperium itself. The faint echo of the Emperor's warning still lingered in his mind, a thread of meaning that tugged at him with each step. "You are not hidden." The implication gnawed at him, not as fear, but as awareness. Whatever forces stirred now did so because of him, not because of what he might become, but because of what he already was in a galaxy unprepared to contain him. The corridor opened into a colossal chamber shaped like the interior of a hollowed star. Light, if it was light, poured down from unseen heights in swirling currents, bending around the custodian's armor with slow, fluid motion. Obi-Wan felt a tremor race through the force, so sharp that for a moment he lost breath. Something vast dwelled here, something that pulsed with psychic intensity beyond anything he had ever encountered. The custodian leader spoke quietly. "The Astronomicon lies ahead. No outsider enters its proximity without purpose." Obi-Wan sensed the truth in those words at once. The force around him rippled like water disturbed by a falling ember. The warp beyond the walls surged and pressed, a living ocean held back only by will and ritual. The Astronomicon's power radiated outward like a sun forged from mines rather than fire. As they moved deeper, the corridor widened into a bridge suspended above an abyss filled with swirling psychic energies. Below, countless silhouettes, emaciated psychers chained into place, knelt in circular formations. Their chanting rose in agonized waves, forming a rhythm that made the air throb. Their faces were drained, their eyes white or sunken, yet their minds burned like torches feeding an endless furnace. Obi-Wan forced himself to look, his heart tightening. Each voice was a thread in the Astronomican's great beacon, each life a fleeting spark consumed to project humanity's only light through the warp's eternal storm. He felt the Force recoil from the suffering, yet also reach toward it, as if drawn by the desperate will that held the Imperium together. A sudden psychic pulse shuddered through the bridge, and the chanting wavered. Obi-Wan staggered, gripping the railing as the Force convulsed violently. It was not the warp's hunger. It was not a demon's intrusion. It was something else. A summons. The custodians tightened formation, as though they too felt the shift. The leader gestured toward a towering adamantine gate, carved with sigils blazing faintly like molten gold. "This is further than any uninitiated should walk," he said, "yet the Emperor permits your passage." Obi-Wan approached slowly, the Force swirling with trepidation and involuntary awe. The gate opened without touch, without mechanism, without sound. What lay beyond struck him with breathtaking force. A vast circular chamber stretched into infinity, its floor a polished surface reflecting shifting constellations. At the center stood a platform suspended above a vortex of psychic light. The energy spiraled upward in luminous storms that defied gravity, their colors shifting from gold to azure to deep crimson as they twisted into the heights. Obi-Wan felt the Emperor's presence again, faint, fragmented, yet undeniably guiding him forward with invisible hands. As he stepped onto the platform, the custodians halted at its edge. "We go no farther," the leader said. "What lies ahead is for you and the Astronomican alone." Obi-Wan nodded, though a coil of unease tightened within him. He walked alone toward the heart of the vortex. As he reached the center, the air condensed suddenly, thickening like a cocoon of pressure around his body. The Force surged inward, then outward, as if tasting the warp and recoiling. The psychic storm expanded. Obi-Wan gasped as light swallowed everything, and the platform dissolved beneath him. He stood now within a realm that defied form, neither physical nor fully immaterial. Stars flickered into existence and vanished like sparks in a wind. Rivers of brilliance flowed through empty space, twisting into shapes that resembled memories and aspirations. Obi-Wan felt the Force vibrate in harmony and dissonance at once, blending with energies he did not recognize yet could not reject. Then he saw them. Countless souls, flickering like candles in a hurricane, some bright, some fading, all feeding the great beacon that stretched across realities. He heard their cries and their prayers, saw their sacrifices etched into the very currents of the warp. Each one anchored the Astronomican's signal, lending strength to a light that guided humanity's vessels through the chaos. Obi-Wan stepped closer. The luminance wrapped around him, probing, evaluating, trying to understand the shape and nature of his being. He felt himself laid bare once again, though not with the violating intensity of the Emperor's gaze. This presence was raw, primal, shaped from collective will rather than singular divinity. A whisper, no, a resonance, echoed through him. "What are you?" The Force shuddered, unable to answer. The warp surged, demanding clarity. Obi-Wan felt both currents collide within him, tangling like two tides striking a single shore. For a moment, the pressure became unbearable. Reality blurred. He sensed the edge of his consciousness fraying into the currents around him. Then a warm, steady presence anchored him. Not the Emperor's. The memory of Qui-Gon's voice. The echo of Yoda's teachings. The distant laughter of young Anakin before destiny twisted their paths. The Force steadied him, not as a shield, but as a reminder of who he was. The warp recoiled slightly, as if startled by the purity of that anchor. The light dimmed just enough for him to breathe again. A new impression formed, less a question, more a realization. You are unbound, not ours, yet not apart. Obi-Wan sensed danger in the recognition. The Astronomican understood him now as something alien, something uncorrupted by the warp but vulnerable to it. A bridge, a possibility. The vortex grew brighter, more demanding, more aware. Then, suddenly, another presence cut through the psychic storm, sharp, commanding, undeniable. The Emperor, not in full, but a sliver of his mind pushed through the chaos with a force that bent the warp around it, creating a narrow passage of clarity. His presence enveloped Obi-Wan, shielding him from the Astronomican's probing hunger. The meaning was unmistakable. Enough. The storm receded, though its curiosity lingered like a breath against his ear. Obi-Wan felt the platform solidify beneath him once more. The chamber returned, the light dimming to tolerable levels. His knees felt weak, his breath ragged, his mind echoing with impressions not meant for mortal comprehension. The custodians stepped forward, but none spoke. They saw enough in his expression to know he had walked the edge between revelation and annihilation. Obi-Wan steadied himself. He had seen the heart that guided the Imperium. He had felt its hunger, its suffering, its power. And he understood now that his presence within this galaxy was a variable neither the warp nor the Emperor could ignore. The path ahead was no longer merely dangerous. It was inevitable. The chamber around him pulsed faintly as the custodians guided Obi-Wan away from the Astronomican's inner sanctum. The psychic pressure faded with each step, but its imprint clung to him like frost on skin. He felt hollowed, as though something vast had passed through him and left an echo of its presence behind. The Force fluttered uncertainly, struggling to regain equilibrium after its collision with the warp's ravenous depths. Still, beneath the disorientation, a strange clarity formed, fragile as early dawn, but unmistakable. As they entered a quieter corridor lined with statues of long-dead heroes, the custodian leader paused. His helm tilted, as though listening to something Obi-Wan could not hear. "The Astronomican revealed to you more than it should have," he said quietly. "Its gaze is not meant for those unbound." Obi-Wan nodded, though he found no words that could express what he had seen, or what had seen him. The custodian resumed walking, but Obi-Wan sensed unease in the warrior's steps. The tension in the air thickened with each passing moment, as though the palace itself braced for something only the Emperor could perceive. They approached a wide archway adorned with constellations carved from marble and gold. As Obi-Wan crossed the threshold, the world shifted around him.